William strips Camilla's royal title after she humiliates Catherine in front of world leaders. It was a moment that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and beyond. In a move few could have predicted, and even fewer thought possible, Prince William has stripped Queen Camilla of her royal title, a stunning escalation in the simmering tensions within the House of Windsor. The decision came after an extraordinary incident that unfolded on the world stage. Camilla, standing alongside global leaders and dignitaries, publicly humiliated Catherine, Princess of Wales, in a manner that left observers stunned and cameras rolling. Witnesses described the scene as icy and deliberately cutting. In front of a high-profile international audience, Camilla is alleged to have made a remark or perhaps delivered a gesture so pointed that Catherine's expression visibly changed, a fleeting moment of discomfort captured by photographers from every major news outlet. Within hours, the footage had gone viral, igniting fierce debate about the Queen Consort's conduct and reigniting long-buried questions about her place in the monarchy. For William, this was not merely a breach of etiquette. Friends of the prince say the humiliation of his wife cut to the core, not only as a future king, but as a husband fiercely protective of Catherine's dignity. Palace insiders reveal that what followed was a series of tense, closed-door conversations, culminating in William's unprecedented decision to formally remove Camilla's royal title, a symbolic yet devastating blow that effectively redefines her role within the royal hierarchy. The move has set off a media firestorm. Headlines blared across the UK: Camilla falls from grace, William draws the line, and a royal rift exposed. Social media erupted with hashtags like #StandWithCatherine and #RoyalRespect trending globally within hours. Supporters praised William for taking a principled stand, framing it as an act of loyalty to his wife in a defense of the monarchy's dignity. Critics, however, accused him of fueling a public feud that could destabilize the royal family at a delicate time. But beneath the spectacle lies something deeper, a story about power, respect, and the fault lines that still run through the Windsor dynasty. This was not a spontaneous outburst, nor a petty squabble. It was the climax of months, perhaps years of quiet tensions, subtle slights, and unspoken resentments that have now burst into public view. The G20 summit dinner at Buckingham Palace was the kind of event where every detail spoke volumes. The long red carpet glowed under the soft light of golden chandeliers, and the scent of fresh roses filled the air. Leaders from the world's most powerful nations arrived in shimmering waves of protocol and prestige. Their arrival was marked by the subtle hum of diplomatic greetings, the flash of cameras, and the murmurs of distinguished guests who understood the weight of the evening. Inside, the palace gleamed like a living museum, its walls lined with portraits of monarchs who had shaped centuries of history. The air felt electric, filled with quiet conversations and the soft clink of crystal. Footmen moved like clockwork, refilling glasses, adjusting place settings, and ensuring nothing broke the spell of perfection. This was not simply a dinner, it was a stage upon which alliances would be strengthened, impressions made, and the image of the monarchy reinforced before a global audience. Catherine had spent weeks preparing for this night. Every choice, from the deep jewel tone of her gown to the delicate selection of her jewelry, was intentional. The dress itself was a masterpiece, tailored to move with her and reflect both elegance and strength. Even her hairstyle, a polished yet soft arrangement, spoke of balance between modern sophistication and timeless tradition. This was her moment to embody grace before the eyes of the world. She knew that cameras would study her expressions, that diplomats would measure her composure, and that every interaction could leave a lasting impression. Yet she entered the gilded ballroom with a serenity that came from years of carrying herself under public scrutiny. Her eyes swept the room, offering warm smiles, her posture commanding attention without demanding it. What Catherine could not know was that behind the flawless surface of the evening, tensions quietly brewed. Somewhere in the intricate web of seating arrangements and formal courtesies, threads were being pulled that would change the course of the night. She carried herself with the calm poise of a future queen, but the stage was already set for a test that would push her dignity to its limits. Years of silent rivalry. For years, a quiet tension had simmered beneath the polished smiles and perfectly timed photographs. Camilla and Catherine moved through the same grand corridors of the palace, their paths crossing at ceremonies, state dinners, and charity events. On the surface, their interactions were polite and cordial. They exchanged the expected courtesies, posed side by side for official portraits, and spoke warmly of one another in public statements. Yet beneath the surface, there was a current of unease, an unspoken recognition that their places in the royal hierarchy were not just defined by titles but by the public's perception. Whispers began early on. Popularity polls, circulated discreetly but always finding their way into palace ears, showed Catherine's warmth, elegance, and connection with the people, consistently placing her ahead in the public's affections. Crowds cheered her name. Her image adorned magazine covers worldwide, and her causes drew attention and funding with remarkable speed. For Camilla, who had fought for acceptance within the monarchy and endured years of public scrutiny, this was a quiet but persistent sting. She had worked hard to carve out her place, but no amount of experience seemed to outweigh the effortless admiration Catherine commanded. Over time, the tension began to take shape in ways few would openly acknowledge. There were subtle remarks passed off as harmless jokes, schedules rearranged so Catherine's engagements seemed overshadowed by Camilla's appearances, and occasional oversights where invitations to key gatherings failed to reach her until the last moment. To the outside world, these incidents might have looked like the natural chaos of a busy royal calendar. But those within the palace, especially staff who moved between households, began to recognize a deliberate pattern. Catherine, for her part, never allowed the tension to surface in her behavior. She maintained her composure, treated Camilla with respect, and focused on her duties. Yet she could not ignore the slight chill in certain interactions, the small ways in which her space was quietly encroached upon. Camilla, though seasoned in royal life and well aware of the importance of unity, seemed unwilling to fully share the spotlight. There was a competitiveness that lingered in her gaze during public appearances, as though she measured each handshake, each photograph, each moment of applause. It was a rivalry without open confrontation, but one felt in the shifting dynamics of the family's public image. Behind closed doors, staff sometimes referred to it as a game of silent moves. One week, it might be an adjustment in the seating plan at a high-profile event. Another week, it could be a carefully timed media release that subtly redirected public attention. These were not grand acts of hostility, but small, calculated steps that, over the years, built an unshakable undercurrent of strain. No one could have predicted how far this quiet game would go or how visible it would one day become. The seeds of discord had been sown long ago, and while they remained hidden beneath layers of etiquette and duty, they were destined to break through the surface. All it would take was the right moment, the perfect stage, and one decisive act for the rivalry to step out of the shadows and into the glare of the world's attention. The orchestrated humiliation. The grand ballroom shimmered under the glow of 1,000 crystal droplets. It was a scene of refinement and prestige, the kind that made history books linger on the details. Catherine entered with the grace of someone who had earned her place in the heart of the nation. Her gown, a masterwork of design and meaning, moved with her every step, each smile genuine. Her presence drawing the gaze of not only the guests but the countless cameras lining the edges of the room. This was a night meant to represent unity, diplomacy, and the quiet power of the monarchy. But within the same room, unseen currents of tension stirred. Camilla had spent the day moving through the palace halls with an unusual air of certainty. She had reviewed the seating charts earlier, her eyes scanning until they found Catherine's name. A few swift words to a discreet aide, a subtle shift in the arrangement, and suddenly Catherine's place at the table was no longer beside a key ally, but at the far end, separated from the conversations that mattered most. To the untrained eye, it seemed a harmless adjustment. To those who knew the politics of the royal table, it was a calculated move. The dinner began with the gentle hum of diplomatic exchanges. Catherine engaged her new neighbors with warmth, refusing to let the odd seating dampen her spirit. Yet the unease lingered, as though she sensed the night's script had been quietly rewritten. It was during the second course that the moment unfolded. A waiter approached from behind, balancing a tray of crystal glasses filled with deep red wine. In the precise instant he leaned forward, Camilla's hand nudged her own glass ever so slightly into his path. The result was immediate and devastating. A cascade of wine spilled over Catherine's gown, soaking the delicate fabric and blooming across it like a cruel scarlet flower. Gasps rippled through the table. Cameras, always hungry for a story, caught the moment in perfect clarity from every angle. Catherine froze for a heartbeat, her composure wavering under the sting of embarrassment. The gown she had chosen so carefully was now ruined in front of leaders, dignitaries, and millions watching from afar. Camilla offered a performance worthy of the stage, her hands raised in mock horror, her voice floating with concern that never quite reached her eyes. The guests murmured, some leaning in with polite sympathy, others too aware of the drama unfolding to speak at all. Catherine dabbed at her gown with a linen napkin, her movements calm, her voice steady, as if determined to keep her dignity intact despite the humiliation pressing in from every side. By the time the next course was served, the photographs were already making their way to the outside world. The image of a drenched yet graceful Catherine was destined to circle the globe before the evening ended. Few would suspect the careful hand that had set the moment in motion. But for William, watching from across the room, the truth was already painfully clear. This was no accident, it was an orchestration, and it had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The breaking point. The music played softly as the guests settled back into their seats, the glow of the chandeliers casting golden light across the tables. Catherine sat gracefully, her posture unshaken despite the deep red stain that now marred her gown. She managed a polite smile, her voice calm as she reassured those nearby that everything was fine. In truth, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her. She was acutely aware that the world was watching, that every camera in the room had captured her humiliation. Yet she refused to let the moment define her. She lifted her glass, engaged in quiet conversation, and carried herself as though nothing had happened. It was in this calm that an unexpected sound broke through. Somewhere behind her, a burst of laughter rang out sharp, unguarded, and unmistakably cruel. At first, it seemed almost impossible that such a sound could come from a member of the royal family in such a moment, but the microphone placed near the head table had caught it clearly, its tone echoing faintly through the speakers before the technician quickly muted the feed. Guests glanced toward the source, some pretending not to hear, others exchanging knowing looks. William, seated just a few chairs away, heard it as if it had been whispered directly into his ear. His eyes found Camilla, who made no effort to hide the smirk lingering on her face. The realization settled in his chest with cold certainty. This was no accident. The spill, the seating arrangement, the calculated timing, it had all been orchestrated. The laughter was not just unkind, it was a confirmation, a quiet declaration of victory in a game Catherine had never chosen to play. Across the table, Catherine's expression did not falter. She continued to speak warmly to the diplomat beside her, her hands resting lightly on the table, her eyes bright with composure. But William could see the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers curled slightly against the fabric of her ruined gown. He knew her well enough to recognize the effort it took to remain serene in the face of such deliberate cruelty. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Dishes were served and cleared, toasts were made, and polite applause filled the air. Yet for William, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The event was no longer about diplomacy or ceremony. It was about a line that had been crossed, one that could not be ignored. His role as a future king demanded restraint, but his role as a husband demanded action. As the final toast concluded and the guests began to disperse, William's gaze remained fixed on Camilla. He felt the full weight of what had just happened, not only a public humiliation for Catherine, but a personal attack that struck at the core of their marriage. In that moment, beneath the glittering lights of the ballroom, William made a silent vow this would not be forgotten, and it would not go unanswered. Behind closed doors, the grandeur of the state dinner faded quickly once the last guest had departed. The echo of polished shoes on marble was replaced by the low murmur of staff clearing tables and the faint clinking of silverware being gathered. Catherine had been escorted quietly to her private quarters, her gown carefully removed and sent for emergency restoration, though the damage could never truly be undone. William, however, was not ready to retreat. His stride through the palace corridors was swift and deliberate, his jaw set, his thoughts burning with every step. He found Camilla in one of the smaller reception rooms, a crystal glass in her hand, her expression hovering between irritation and defiance. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the silence thick with unspoken history. William broke it first, his voice low but laced with a fury he rarely allowed to surface. He demanded to know why she had humiliated his wife in front of the most influential leaders in the world. He asked whether the seating change, the wine spill, and even the laugh had been planned. Camilla's response was measured but cutting. She claimed the incident was nothing more than an unfortunate series of coincidences, that the world was too quick to assume malice. Yet her eyes betrayed a glimmer of satisfaction she could not entirely conceal. William's patience frayed, his words sharper now. He reminded her that Catherine was not only his wife, but the future queen, and that respect within the family was not optional. It was then that King Charles entered, his presence heavy with the authority of a monarch and the wariness of a father. He positioned himself between them, one hand raised as if to physically hold back the storm. His voice was calm but firm, urging restraint, reminding them both of the dangers of airing private grievances in a family already scrutinized by the public. Yet even he could see that this was not a simple disagreement. This was a fracture in the family's foundation, one that would not easily be repaired. Charles attempted to soften the tension, suggesting the matter be put to rest for the sake of appearances. But William was unmoved. The room felt charged, as if centuries of royal history were pressing in on them. For the first time in years, the heir apparent and the queen consort stood openly opposed, their words heavy with consequences that reached far beyond personal feelings. Elsewhere in the palace, senior aides moved quickly to contain the fallout. Instructions were given to ensure no footage of the spilled wine incident reached the press before it could be reviewed. Public statements were drafted, each line carefully crafted to portray unity and elegance. Whispered conversations in the corridors debated whether the microphones had truly caught Camilla's laughter or if the audio could be explained away. But the truth was already set in motion. Behind closed doors, in the quiet after the storm, it was clear that something irreversible had happened. The palace could manage appearances for the world, but within its gilded walls, a battle line had been drawn, and everyone knew this was only the beginning. The evidence emerges. In the days following the dinner, the palace tried to project calm, but behind the scenes, a very different story was unfolding. Whispers began circulating through the service corridors and private offices. Members of staff who had long remained silent started speaking in hushed voices to trusted ears. Some had worked in the royal household for decades, their loyalty unquestionable. Yet they could no longer ignore what they had seen over the years. They spoke of small but deliberate acts, moments where Catherine had been subtly undermined, and the growing sense that the dinner incident was the result of something carefully planned rather than an unfortunate accident. The first real crack in the palace's controlled narrative came from a senior aide who had overseen seating arrangements for the event. In a confidential conversation later passed on to William's most trusted advisors, the aide confirmed that Catherine's placement at the far end of the table had been a last-minute change. The request, they said, had come directly from Camilla's office. It was a decision that raised eyebrows at the time but went unquestioned in the flurry of preparations. Then came the security footage, stored deep within the palace's internal archives. It showed every detail of the dining hall from multiple angles. William was given access to review it privately. On the screen, the scene played out in quiet, damning clarity. Camilla could be seen speaking to a waiter moments before the spill, her hand gesturing toward Catherine's place. A minute later, she shifted her glass in a way that aligned perfectly with the waiter's approach, setting into motion the cascade of wine that stained Catherine's gown. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but in slow motion, the sequence left little room for doubt. The final blow came in the form of documents. A chain of emails and handwritten notes, uncovered by a member of the events team, revealed correspondence between Camilla's staff and certain suppliers. One note in particular referred to Catherine's dress color and the likelihood of a red wine pairing for the main course. The language was careful, never openly stating intent, but the implications were chilling. When William was presented with all of this, the weight of it settled heavily on his shoulders. It was no longer a matter of speculation or wounded pride. There was now proof that the humiliation had been deliberate. What had been an act witnessed by the world was also a betrayal carried out within the walls of their own home. The evidence could not be erased, and William knew it would change everything. The palace could try to control the story, but behind its gilded doors, the truth had already been written, and it would demand a response. William's ultimatum. The clock in William's private study ticked steadily, but the room itself felt frozen in heavy stillness. He sat at the large oak desk, the gathered evidence laid out before him: photographs, transcripts of staff testimonies, security footage, still images, and the chain of correspondence painted a picture he could no longer ignore. This was not just about a single evening gone wrong. It was about the dignity of his wife, the unity of the royal family, and the moral authority of the crown itself. When Camilla entered the room, her expression was guarded, as if she already knew the conversation that awaited her. William rose to his feet, his eyes fixed firmly on hers. His voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of unshakable resolve. He told her that what had happened at the state dinner was unforgivable, that he had irrefutable proof it had been deliberate, and that the time for quiet tolerance was over. He demanded a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a private apology to Catherine. More than that, he insisted on the removal of certain ceremonial privileges that Camilla enjoyed as queen consort. He explained that this was not about titles alone, but about the respect and trust that had been damaged beyond repair. Camilla listened in silence, her jaw tight, her gaze shifting briefly toward the pile of evidence before returning to him. William made it clear that if nothing was done, he would take the matter into his own hands. He spoke of his future role as king, of the duty he owed to protect the institution, and of his unwillingness to allow such behavior to go unchallenged. His final words left no doubt: if the palace refused to act, he would ensure the truth reached the public in full. The gravity of his ultimatum reached beyond the walls of the study. Once word of it reached King Charles, the matter became a constitutional dilemma. It was a rare and dangerous standoff, the heir apparent confronting the reigning queen consort. Advisors whispered of the unprecedented nature of such a rift. Legal experts began reviewing the limits of William's influence, while still the Prince of Wales. And senior courtiers debated how the monarchy could survive a public fracture at such a high level. The meeting ended without resolution, but the lines had been drawn. William had made his position unshakably clear, and the palace now faced a choice between protecting its image and addressing a wrong that could not be quietly swept away. The storm that had begun with a single glass of wine was now poised to shake the foundations of the monarchy itself. The king's impossible choice. King Charles had faced difficult decisions throughout his life, but nothing compared to the storm now brewing within the palace walls. In the privacy of his study, he sat alone for a long time, his hands clasped as he weighed the consequences of every possible choice. On one side stood his son, the heir to the throne, a man whose loyalty to the crown was matched only by his devotion to his wife. On the other side stood Camilla, his queen consort, his partner of many years, and the woman who had stood beside him through decades of scrutiny. Choosing between them was unthinkable, yet doing nothing was becoming impossible. The pressure intensified as word of William's ultimatum spread through the highest circles of the monarchy. Senior courtiers, alarmed at the potential fallout, urged Charles to seek immediate counsel. Within days, an emergency meeting of the Privy Council was convened. The gathering was discreet but tense, attended by trusted advisors, legal experts, and a handful of senior royals who understood the gravity of the moment. In that chamber, the issue was laid bare. The evidence against Camilla was reviewed in careful detail: the seating change, the wine spill, the recorded laughter, and the paper trail all painted a damning picture. Yet the matter was not just about guilt or innocence. It was about the stability of the monarchy itself. Stripping a queen consort of privileges would be unprecedented in modern times and could send shockwaves through the Commonwealth. Ignoring the issue, however, risked alienating the future king and damaging the public's faith in the royal family's unity. Charles listened in silence as each advisor spoke. Some urged caution, fearing that decisive action against Camilla would be seen as a betrayal of his marriage. Others argued that William's stance reflected the will of a younger generation determined to protect the monarchy's moral standing. The debate stretched late into the evening, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the outside world. In the quiet moments between discussions, Charles's thoughts drifted to the images now burned into his mind: Catherine sitting with dignity in her stained gown, William's steady but furious gaze, and Camilla's guarded expression as she faced her accusers. Every choice carried a cost, and there was no path forward that would leave all relationships intact. By the end of the session, no final decision had been made, but the weight of the crown felt heavier than ever. Charles knew that whatever path he chose would define not only his reign, but the foundation upon which William would one day stand. The future of the monarchy hung in the balance, suspended between loyalty, justice, and the unyielding gaze of the public. The royal reckoning. The breaking point came on a crisp morning when the palace press office summoned the world's media for an unscheduled announcement. The invitation was brief and offered no explanation, but the tone suggested something significant. Cameras and reporters filled the briefing room, their murmurs creating a steady hum of speculation. Outside the palace gates, crowds gathered, sensing that history was about to be made. William stepped forward alone, dressed in a tailored dark suit, his expression steady but resolute. The room fell silent. He began by speaking of his lifelong commitment to the crown, of the duty to serve with honor, and of the sacred responsibility to protect those who dedicate themselves to the monarchy. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words left no doubt that this was a moment unlike any in recent royal history. He acknowledged the events of the state dinner, describing them as a grave breach of trust and dignity. Without mentioning Camilla by name at first, he spoke of how no member of the royal household, regardless of rank, could be permitted to act in ways that harmed the unity and moral standing of the family. Then he paused, allowing the tension to settle before making his declaration. Effective immediately, he announced, the honorary titles and ceremonial privileges granted to the queen consort would be withdrawn. This action, he explained, was taken with the full understanding of its rarity and impact, but also with the belief that the monarchy must hold itself to the highest standard of conduct. His words were precise, his tone unwavering, as he stated that this decision was not born of personal resentment, but of the duty to protect the integrity of the crown for future generations. The statement was brief, yet its implications were seismic. As soon as William stepped away from the podium, the room erupted into a frenzy of shouted questions, camera flashes, and hurried phone calls. Across the world, the announcement dominated headlines. Commentators called it unprecedented, a bold move that would alter the royal landscape for decades. Some praised William for his courage, calling him a protector of justice and a modern leader willing to act decisively. Others criticized the decision as too severe, warning that it risked deepening divisions within the family. In the days that followed, the ripple effects were felt in every corner of the Commonwealth. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for William's actions among younger generations, while older traditionalists expressed discomfort at such a public rebuke of a reigning consort. Diplomats in several countries quietly commended the transparency, seeing it as a sign that the next reign would bring a new level of accountability within the palace. The atmosphere was one of stunned silence. Camilla retreated from public life, her absence at engagements noted but not explained. Catherine, though still reserved in her public remarks, was seen alongside William with a renewed air of quiet confidence. The royal reckoning had arrived, and it had sent a clear message: the era of silent tolerance had ended. The new order. The weeks following William's historic announcement unfolded like a slow but undeniable shift in the monarchy's balance of power. The absence of Camilla from public life was immediate and absolute. Her name quietly disappeared from the schedules of royal engagements. Her portraits in certain ceremonial halls were discreetly moved to less prominent positions, and her presence at official gatherings became a thing of the past. No official statement explained her withdrawal, but the truth required no words. The world had witnessed the moment her influence had been stripped away, and now the silence spoke louder than any proclamation. For the public, the most striking change was the renewed visibility of Catherine. Where once she had been the target of quiet undermining, she now stepped into the spotlight with a calm authority that felt both natural and inevitable. Her first public appearance after the state dinner scandal was a charity event supporting children's mental health. Dressed in a tailored sapphire gown, she greeted guests with her usual warmth. But there was a new quality in her demeanor, a quiet resilience forged from having endured and overcome one of the most humiliating moments of her public life. The cameras followed her every move, but this time the narrative was different. Headlines praised her grace and dignity, while commentators remarked on how the public's affection for her had only grown stronger in the wake of the controversy. Crowds that gathered at her engagements seemed larger, their applause more sustained. Even her smallest gestures, a hand on a child's shoulder, a genuine laugh shared with a volunteer, became symbols of a monarchy grounded in compassion rather than ceremony alone. Behind the palace walls, the hierarchy had been reshaped in ways that could not be undone. William's decisive action had sent a clear signal to every member of the royal household. Respect and unity were not optional, and personal rivalries would not be allowed to erode the institution's standing. Senior courtiers began adjusting their loyalties, quietly aligning themselves with the Prince and Princess of Wales. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The international stage also took notice. World leaders who had been present at the fateful dinner now viewed William and Catherine as a unified and unshakable team, capable of facing internal and external challenges with strength. Invitations for joint appearances increased, and diplomatic circles spoke of the couple as the future of a modernized monarchy. Camilla's exile, though not officially named as such, marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The royal family's image, once shadowed by whispers of division, was now defined by the visible partnership of William and Catherine. In the eyes of the public, they were not just heirs to the throne, but symbols of a renewed vision for the crown, one built on accountability, dignity, and an unyielding commitment to each other. The new order had taken hold, and it was clear it would shape the monarchy for generations to come. Beneath the glitter of chandeliers and the watchful eyes of the world, a single dinner became a turning point for the crown. William didn't just defend Catherine, he rewrote the rules of royal silence. The message was clear: the next king will not hide behind tradition when justice calls. If this is the man set to lead the monarchy, then the days of quiet compliance are numbered. Because when a future king chooses truth over protocol, nothing will ever be the same again.